The universe began with the Big Bang, and for a while, there was nothing but extremely hot matter flying in all directions at the speed of light. However, the first star soon appeared. Its name was Methuselah. For a long time, it puzzled astronomers who believed it might be even older than the universe itself. I checked. Soon after that, on a cosmic scale, of course, the first black holes began to form. Scientists believe they are the remnants of exploded stars, but to this day, no one is completely certain. At the same time, cosmic dust and matter started to become ionized, helping to form new stars. Eventually, thousands and then millions of stars appeared across space. The universe, which had cooled down after the initial Big Bang, began to heat up again. Over the course of about 100 million years, stars started forming clusters that we now call galaxies. I checked. However, planets had not yet formed in those early galaxies. It was still too soon for matter to come together into something as large and solid as that. So, the galaxies were mostly made up of stars and interstellar gas. It is believed that the oldest galaxies were born in a relatively small region of space, called the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. This name comes from the Hubble Space Telescope, and the star field contains more than 10,000 galaxies. After some time, the first exoplanet came into existence. It was also called Methuselah because of its incredibly old age. This planet orbits two stars at the same time and is located 12.5 million light-years from Earth's current position. However, not long after that, the Milky Way finally began to take shape. I checked. Our galaxy is a barred spiral, meaning it has a bar-shaped center and several arms. Above one of those arms, our solar system would eventually be born. However, at that time, it was just a round clump of cosmic sushi. The Milky Way began to form just about 200 million years after the Big Bang, much like many other galaxies, but only now has it become more familiar to us through science. At the same time, millions of other galaxies also appeared, filled with stars and planets coming together within them. Around 11.5 billion years ago, a special planet emerged. Captain P is the oldest known exoplanet and is strikingly similar to Earth in nearly every way. No one knows whether life exists there, but it probably does because it has had plenty of time for life to develop. Spiral galaxies are the most common type today, and perhaps the longest spiral galaxy we know of is BS 442. This galaxy is located 10.7 billion light-years away from our position. At the same time, the rate of star formation across the universe reached its peak. I checked. Every second, many new stars were forming, and they immediately began to pull each other together, forming clusters that would later become galaxies. At this point, the temperature of the universe started to gradually drop. Even then, it was still hotter than the surface of the sun and quite dense. But starting around 11 billion years ago, everything began to change. Powerful galaxies and newly formed stars no longer released as much energy into space. The first metal-rich stars began to appear, and the presence of metal caused them to cool down more quickly. So, the universe had finally become capable of supporting life, and less than 10 billion years before humans arrived, the first galaxy cluster GKCSO-41 had formed. It is the most distant galaxy cluster ever discovered. It formed about 200 million years before the universe reached 1/3 of its current size. But on a cosmic scale, those 200 million years were just a fleeting moment, and around the same time, the star Penna appeared in the Milky Way. It is one of the oldest stars in our galaxy and also a close neighbor, located just 6 light-years from the Sun. As the universe continued to expand, the Milky Way kept growing and gradually took on the familiar shape we see today. Up until about 8.8 billion years ago, it was just a thick disk of structure surrounding the center where older, gas-rich stars were commonly found. Now, a thin disk began to form a slimmer layer within the thick disk where younger, more metal-rich stars started to appear. In our galaxy, stars were still being born at an extremely high rate, just like in many other galaxies across this ever-expanding universe. But around 8 billion years ago, that growth rate finally began to slow down. Of course, the same thing happened in many other galaxies as well, mainly because there wasn't enough material left to form new stars in such a chaotic environment. Then, around 7.5 billion years ago, something happened far beyond our galaxy. A gamma burst began spreading across the universe, and it didn't reach Earth until 2008. Explosions like this usually occur when a star goes supernova, and such events are incredibly spectacular. But this one was truly special. It was the most distant and brightest explosion ever recorded in history. If it were as close to us as the sun, it would be 21 trillion times brighter than our star. To be clear, that's the number 21 followed by 15 zeros. Events like this have taken place in the far reaches of the universe. Meanwhile, the universe continued to cool at an accelerating rate. Around 7.2 billion years ago, the average temperature of space was minus 268 C, just a few degrees warmer than today's minus 270 C. Eventually, the universe will reach absolute zero, the temperature at which atoms stop moving. At that point, space will be dark and completely silent. Hi checked. DD Sao, Thuvan Khan Rekt Launia Mga and Thui Heim Ne. The gig la Thui Heim, Ketch Thui Hein My 65 TNCM. Ki Jijiangan Hobby T Du Ko and Dong Zone CC Dinan Ra. Se King Khan Launia Cho. An Enki H Mat Trui QSA Chung Tan Than. Nvan Khan Ni Ao Hu Exi Ra Trink Ko. Niao Thian Hajie Hun Ka Ko and Dong Bei Gig. The CAC and Gay Sao Tip TAC and Than the Fat Ends. Town CAC Chen Tin Kong El Hen. So Ko CAC El Hen Se Sin Ra CAC Thian Hakuk. 6 billion years ago, dark energy, the most mysterious force in the universe, somehow began accelerating the expansion of the universe. No one can say for sure how it works, but we now know that gravity isn't the only force capable of keeping objects apart in space. However, no one fully understands this strange energy yet, so nothing is certain. 5.5 billion years ago, the solar nebula began to collapse. This is important to us because that nebula would eventually become the solar system. At that time, it was just a massive cloud of interstellar gas and dust. It would take another billion years for the material to come together and form our sun and the planets that orbit it. Meanwhile, the Milky Way had finally taken on its complete barred spiral shape. Just as we know it today, new stars were forming, while supernovae were exploding out in space. All of these processes never truly stopped. In addition, there was one event that happened around 4.6 billion years ago that was incredibly important to us: the formation of the sun. The cloud of dust and gas I mentioned earlier eventually collapsed enough to form a star, and just a few million years later, Earth was born. At that time, Earth was extremely hot, and no form of life could survive. But after a few 100 million years, something miraculous happened. The first living organisms began to appear on the planet's surface. Since then, many things both good and bad have happened on Earth, but in the end, here we are, on this nearly one-of-a-kind and beautiful planet, a place called Earth, born from the universe, a universe filled with countless mysteries of space and time. It's a world of wonder and uncertainty. But if you're curious, if you have questions and want to explore what the universe, space, and time are really like, then like, share, and subscribe to join me on this journey of discovery. Hi checked.